くりり DBG。
Recently, it dawned on me that Nero has been the face of Devil May Cry equally, if not more so than Dante has. Personally, I think it would be absurd to proclaim that Nero is somehow more closely associated with the Devil May Cry brand than Dante. Though Dante's prominence may be a tacit acceptance now, it is still malleable, especially if the series is to continue through its current chronological numeration. Nero was the spearheading newcomer in 2008's Devil May Cry 4, an entry that was met with some pretty incredulous dissonance among longtime fans, particularly due to the ostensible replacing and antagonizing of the tried and true Dante, which led to Nero's reputation as a parvenu or social pariah. But in retrospect, once the dust has settled, his debut was probably the least of that game's worries, and said retrospection may even thwart the capacity of my inclinations about Nero's presence being a considerable talking point at the outset of when Devil May Cry 4's legitimacy was called into question. Though I'm most certain I've heard a healthy amount of pejoratives hurled towards Nero's being there relative to the game's release, I can accept the fact that these could be deemed myopic discussions. Even if Nero's overtaking ultimately became a moot point as the years went on, it is still worth noting that, frankly, there wasn't much going for him upon his debut. Furthermore, his introduction necessitates, or at the very least inquires, partial blame for why the game can feel truncated in some instances. Many of Devil May Cry's character introductions foment emotional resonance, or perhaps a subjugation of sorts, principally when it comes to the series' more intimidating figures. Although well-intentioned, Nero's introduction arouses contempt and possibly even a hint of irritation.
It's beginning to piss me off.
Upon shallowed initial impressions, one could divine that of a hackneyed copy and paste job, with the protagonist's mirrored appearances and braggadocio distinguishable only by Nero's occasional floundering and flare-ups. When our protagonists come ado, these deficiencies are further highlighted. An almost fetishistic portrayal of Dante's showmanship undermines Nero's valency for amateurism. This is also a motif that reverberated a decade later with Devil May Cry 5, even to the point of becoming a meme. Yet the presence of external media provided a greater reflection of Nero's background and psyche. Having a more forthcoming story, such as Devil May Cry 4 Deadly Fortune, commiserated his angsty disposition. Naturally, the issue lies in the fact that, although penned by seasoned Devil May Cry writer Bingo Morihashi, a few of these story points were developed following his exit from Capcom and may lead to some conflictions regarding the official canon. It is curious anyhow, even if I personally don't subscribe to external media for a product, to examine the further indulgence of Nero's victimhood and kenning of his character for the newer generations that Dante's characterization was somewhat limited in doing. Though not totally a blank slate, Nero's humble beginnings are infinitely more relatable and doleful, considerably due to his being statistically more human than that of the Sons of Sparda.
I don't know anyone who is as human as you are.
Forgive the upcoming discursion here, but it is also worth acknowledging how comical Nero's genealogy called forth speculation until finally officialized in Devil May Cry 5, despite how flagrant the signs were, resulting in many of us experiencing the Baader-Meinhof effect when revisiting Devil May Cry 4 or its more pertinent special edition counterpart. I point this out not out of some condescension about this prior incomprehension, but simply because I will most likely not comment on Nero in such a dear manner again, so I felt it was worth addressing. And to think if it weren't for the disapproval of the reboot, we likely wouldn't have gotten these conclusive answers. However, I admit leaving it equivocal and unresolved would have made for a more engaging mythos. I'm sure there was an ensuing communal acceptance of Nero, or at the very least tolerance of him, perhaps most when considering his reopening with the release of Devil May Cry 4's special edition some 7 years later, further permeating his presence and neutralizing the sour notes the DMC Devil May Cry reboot had left in our mouths.
They are disgusting, degrading, ghastly, sleazy, purient, and generally nauseating.
Be that as it may, I still have a hunch his legitimacy wasn't fully realized until Devil May Cry 5 though. The cynical side of me postulated that his uprooting was by virtue of an echoed inclusion of even more marginalized characters, namely the Gammy V.
It seems this sword is still too strong for me.
Ergo, Nero became more palatable and henceforth celebrated. But this downplaying on my part simply negates how tactful his resurgence actually was. Not only was his insouciant side less airtight, but he also proved that his strength is not to be rebuffed, the most prominent display of said strength being his ending of Dante and Vergil's perennial rivalry. Motivated by sheer love, not by the need for vengeance or duty, but conversely by an unwavering, selfless passion for the people he loved and cared for. This is in contrast to quashing by flaunting one's physical prowess. This burning passion for others' well-being proved to be a more formidable policy than the common savant's usual displays of brute force or purposeful self-fortification of physicality. What I also really grew to appreciate about this triumphant resonance was the fact that it was spurred out of reassurance from his significant other, a fond particular that correlates better with the player's own limited potentials. That during which we receive even a modicum of support from someone that we admire, in us newfound strength blossoms.
I'm not letting you die!
My hopes within this composition are to piece together and potentially recall cognizance towards just how deeply Nero's characterization and honor penetrated the myopic membrane, from a somewhat cold unwelcomeness to snugly embraces. I'm glad he finally was able to be rectified and lauded despite the passage of time to achieve this. I'm really excited to see what's in store for Nero if we are to deduce Devil May Cry 5 as being Dante and Vergil's swan song, and if proven true through future confirmation, Nero has more than proved himself to carry the mantle he was originally denied.